Welcome to a Moment in Time podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Freya.
Imagine, if you will, that you are standing alone in this really quiet, temperature-controlled archival room.
Oh, I love setting a scene like this. Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So just picture the sensory reality of this for a second. You're holding two incredibly different documents. In your left hand, you have a heavy, ancient piece of vellum.
Like stiff animal skin parchment, right?
Exactly. It's rigid, it's yellowed with age, and it has that very specific smell, like old dust and dry stone. And bound to this parchment is a cracked, dark wax seal.
Okay, I am with you.
Stamped into that wax is the image of a strange, honestly, almost terrifying deity. It's a creature with the body of a man, the head of a cockerel, and serpents for legs.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is terrifying.
Right. It feels heavy in your hand, just laden with centuries of absolute secrecy, medieval politics, and ultimately, unspeakable violence.
A literal piece of the Dark Ages.
Yeah. Okay, now look at your right hand. In that hand, you're holding a glossy, brightly colored, modern-day vacation itinerary.
Wait, like a travel brochure?
Literally a brochure for a 4-night Caribbean cruise. It's got pricing for balcony suites, shuffleboard schedules, a midnight buffet, the whole 9 yards.
That is quite the juxtaposition.
I mean, what if I told you that these two items, separated by 7 centuries, and this seemingly impossible cultural divide, actually belong to the exact same organization?
It sounds like the setup to a bizarre historical thriller or like a glitch in the Matrix or something.
Right. It feels fake.
But it is entirely real. And that jarring contrast, it perfectly captures the absolute whiplash of studying this particular group.
Because they just cover so much ground.
Exactly. I mean, you have the blood-soaked sands of the 12th century Crusades and the dark, freezing dungeons of the 14th century Inquisition on one side.
Which is what most people think of.
Yeah. And then you jump to modern-day corporate branding, intellectual property law, and charity galas on a cruise ship on the other. It's wild.
And that is our mission for you today on this deep dive. We are taking you on a journey to completely separate the historical facts from the Hollywood fiction regarding one of the most infamous, mythologized, and misunderstood organizations in human history.
The Knights Templar.
The Knights Templar.
And it is a journey that requires us to strip away a massive layer of preconceived notions.
Yeah, we have to start fresh.
We really do. I mean, if your idea of the Templars comes from pop culture or, airport thrillers or late-night cable documentaries, you kind of have to leave that at the door.
Because we have the actual receipts today. We have a fantastic, highly detailed stack of source materials to guide us.
We really do. So we're pulling heavily from an excerpt by Steve Wilson titled Templars and Gnosticism.
Which is super dense but amazing.
It is. It gives us this fascinating, academically grounded look into their alleged secret beliefs and their incredibly controversial alliances out in the Middle East.
And then to bridge that gap into the modern era, we are diving deep into the summer 2007 edition of the Beauseant Journal.
Which is such a unique document to have access to.
Right, because this isn't a history book. It is an actual internal administrative publication of the modern Templar order operating today, right here in the United States.
Yeah, and it contains a groundbreaking, incredibly dense historical analysis of something called the Chinon Parchment.
Which we will definitely get into.
Oh, absolutely. But what's wild is it prints that historical analysis right alongside logistical dispatches about upcoming meetings, trademark disputes, and global humanitarian efforts.
Placing those two things side by side is just a brilliant juxtaposition, because this deep dive isn't just about reciting ancient history or memorizing the dates of battles.
No, it's fundamentally about human nature. It's about institutional survival and how absolute power attempts to crush ideological dissent.
Yeah. We're going to look at the terrifying human cost of the medieval Inquisition and explore how a 700-year-old tragedy somehow managed to birth a modern global charitable movement.
It's a huge arc.
It is. And we are your guides today. Our goal is to unpack the why and the how behind the facts. We aren't just going to tell you that the most powerful knights in Christendom fell.
Right. We're going to explain the actual mechanics of how a superpower is dismantled overnight.
Exactly. So keep an ear out as we go along for the startling, honestly heartbreaking confessions that are recorded when unyielding faith meets unimaginable, legally sanctioned torture.
It gets really dark.
It does. But to understand their catastrophic fall, we have to first understand the existential threat they allegedly posed to the establishment. So let's start with that strange, cracked wax seal in your left hand.
The rooster-headed god.
Yeah, the rooster-headed god. The Wilson text focuses heavily on this idea that the Templars possessed a secret doctrine, and that this doctrine was deeply rooted in Gnosticism.
Which is a heavy word.
It is. So let's define our terms here for everyone listening.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about when we say Gnosticism, specifically in a medieval context?
Well, Gnosticism is tricky because it isn't, a single unified religion. There's no central pope or a strict rule book.
Right, it's more decentralized.
Much more. It is more of an umbrella term for a deeply mystical, highly individualized approach to spirituality. The core belief, and the one that matters most for our story today, is the idea that an individual is completely responsible for their own spiritual development.
Okay, so self-guided faith.
Exactly. Gnostics believe that you, as a human being, inherently possess a divine spark that's basically trapped within the material world.
Like a piece of God inside you.
Yes, and through your own endeavors, your own seeking of hidden knowledge, the Greek word for knowledge being gnosis, right? You could directly approach and understand the divine.
It sounds like Gnosticism was basically the open source software of medieval spirituality.
Oh, I love that comparison.
And the church was trying to protect a strict proprietary monopoly. I mean, they were the ultimate toll booth on the highway to heaven. And the Gnostics were telling people, hey, you can just drive off-road.
That's spot on. Taking that analogy further, think about what happens to the hardware when the software is free.
The company goes under.
Precisely. The medieval Catholic Church wasn't just a spiritual guide, it was a massive geopolitical and economic empire. It drew its absolute authority from the assertion that salvation was a strict monopoly.
They were the only gatekeepers.
The sole gatekeepers. The only way an ordinary person in the 12th century could ever hope to approach God, have their sins forgiven, or, achieve salvation, was through the physical intermediary of the church's priests, their bishops, and their sacraments.
You had to go through them. You had to pay tithes. You had to attend their buildings.
Right. So if everyone suddenly realizes they have direct personal access to the divine through their own gnosis, the entire power structure of the church simply collapses.
The political influence, the immense wealth, the social control over kings and peasants alike, poof.
It would all just vanish.
So it wasn't just a theological disagreement over, interpreting scripture. It was an existential economic and political threat. It was basically treason against the spiritual state.
Absolutely. Any form of Gnostic thinking was immediately and brutally condemned as heretical because it undermined the very foundation of medieval societal order.
So how on earth does this tie back to the Knights Templar? Because they were literally the Pope's own elite private military order. They were the enforcement arm of that exact monopoly.
Which is what makes this so crazy. The text points to physical evidence. They're wax seals.
Okay, but when most people picture a Templar seal, they imagine that famous classic image, right? The two knights riding on a single horse.
Right, which was supposed to symbolize their initial vow of extreme poverty.
Yeah.
2 men, 1 horse.
Yeah, but that wasn't their only seal.
Not at all. That was just the public seal of the order as a whole, the one most recognized. But we have to remember the sheer scale of the Templar operation here.
They were basically a multinational corporation.
Exactly. As they grew from just a handful of poor knights into this massive, incredibly wealthy international organization with thousands of estates across Europe, they developed a really complex bureaucracy.
Sure, they needed paperwork.
Lots of it. They had many different seals for different regional provinces, different high-ranking officials, and different administrative purposes. Tens of thousands of documents needed official authorization.
Right.
And when modern researchers began looking at the surviving seals, either the physical brass stamps themselves or the wax impressions left on documents scattered across European archives, they found something completely baffling.
The rooster-headed god, Abraxas.
Yes. The text cites historian Paul de Saint-Hilaire, who actually conducted a comprehensive study of these artifacts.
Yeah, what did he find?
He found that approximately 10% of the surviving Templar seals from the period between 1210 and 1290 bore explicit, undeniably Gnostic images.
10%, that's not a fluke.
No, it's a statistically significant portion. And the most prominent among them was Abraxas. This is a deity revered by early Christian-era Gnostic sects long before the Middle Ages.
And just to paint the picture again for you listening, Abraxas is traditionally depicted with the torso of a man, the head of a cockerel, and 2 riding serpents for legs.
Often holding a shield and a whip, yeah.
Wait, let me just get this straight. The Pope's most famous Heavily armed Christian knights are stamping official legal paperwork with a rooster-headed, snake-legged Gnostic god.
That is exactly what they were doing.
That seems profoundly reckless. I mean, the text mentions one specific seal housed in the French National Archives that features this Abraxas figure, and it is surrounded by the Latin words secretum templi, the secret of the temple.
Yeah, the secret of the temple.
That sounds like an absolute smoking gun for a heretical inner circle operating right under the Pope's nose. Like, they were openly flaunting it.
It certainly reads like a smoking gun, and, generations of esoteric writers and conspiracy theorists have leapt on that exact interpretation.
Of course they have. It's perfectly mysterious.
Right. But this is where looking at the historical logistical context becomes vital. The text brings in French researcher Michel Lemy, who offers a much more grounded, bureaucratic viewpoint on this.
Okay, what's his take?
Lemy points out that this specific secretum templi seal wasn't being used to seal mystical, heretical manifestos or secret occult rituals. It was used on incredibly mundane, everyday paperwork.
Mundane in what way? Give me an example.
Well, Lamy cites a specific document from 1214. It is signed by the Templar preceptor of France. And the content of the document is literally just a legal agreement about splitting timber rights in a forest between the Templar order and the King of France.
You're saying they stamped a heretical, snake-legged god on a medieval real estate contract about trees.
That mundane context is actually Lemy's entire point. He argues that in the 13th century administrative world, the word secret didn't automatically mean occult or hidden from the uninitiated.
It was just a business term.
Exactly. It was a bureaucratic term. It simply meant private or for the attention of the executive.
Oh, like a modern CEO's private stamp. Confidential.
Yes. As Lamy dryly notes, an agreement about who gets to cut down trees in a forest is hardly a hermetic magical text.
Okay, that makes sense logistically. But I have to ask the obvious question here. If this imagery was so wildly dangerous, so contrary to the Catholic Church, why would the Templars choose it for any seal, even a bureaucratic one?
It's a fair question.
I mean, they didn't just accidentally order a rooster-headed stamp from the medieval office supply catalog. They had to commission it. Lamy himself concedes that they were deliberate in their choices, doesn't he?
He does concede that, which is where the mystery deepens and becomes genuinely fascinating.
Because they knew better.
Oh, absolutely. The Templar leadership was highly educated, well-traveled, and very deliberate. They knew exactly what Abraxas represented.
So there has to be a reason.
Right. And Lamy points to another piece of physical evidence found by a writer named Lucien Carny. It's a badly damaged counterseal that belonged to something called the Secret Priory of the Order of the Temple.
Wait, it's Secret Priory. That sounds like an inner circle.
It does. The image on it is heavily obscured. It looks like a bird bending over something. But the inscription itself confirms the formal existence of an internal, separate organ within the Templar structure.
Okay, so Lamy thinks there really was a group within the group.
He believes this proves there was indeed an intellectual inner circle within the Templars that knowingly and purposefully utilized Gnostic symbolism, perhaps as an inside nod to their broader philosophical views, even if they were just using it to sign off on timber rights.
This brings us to a huge geographical and cultural question.
Right, the where did this come from question.
Exactly. If the Templars were originally a Western European military order, born out of strict French Catholic nobility, where on earth did they pick up these revolutionary Eastern mystic philosophies?
They definitely didn't learn it in Sunday school in Paris.
Right. They didn't just invent Gnosticism while sitting in a castle in France. So where did it come from?
To answer that, we have to look to the environment where the Templars spent the vast majority of their time and where their primary mission was located, the Middle East.
Outremer, the Crusader states.
Exactly. And specifically, we have to look at their interactions with one of the most unlikely groups in history. The text introduces the theories of James Wasserman, an esoteric scholar and historian who explores this dynamic extensively in his book, The Templars and the Assassins.
The Assassins. Man, that name alone conjures up incredible imagery of, like, daggers in the dark and leaping off buildings in video games.
Right, the pop culture version of them is huge.
But who were they, historically speaking, beyond the myths?
Historically, the Order of Assassins were the Nizari Ismailis. They were a sect that originated from a late 8th century schism within Shiite Islam.
Okay.
And it is absolutely worth noting that they are not just a historical footnote. They survive to this day as a vibrant, peaceful community under the spiritual authority of the Aga Khan.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. But back in the medieval period, the Nizari Ismailis, operating in the Levant and Persia, developed a highly sophisticated, deeply mystical and inherently Gnostic philosophy.
How did their philosophy differ from Orthodox Islam at the time?
Well, they didn't just stick to a literalist reading of the Quran, they were intellectual synthesizers.
Synthesizers,
Right.
meaning they borrowed from other stuff.
Exactly. They combined Islamic theology with concepts drawn from European Neoplatonism and Eastern Hinduism.
Let's pause there for a second, because Neoplatonism is one of those dense academic words that gets thrown around a lot in esoteric texts.
It is, it can be really dry.
If I'm a 12th century knight,
Right.
what does Neoplatonism actually look like to me? How does it change my worldview?
Imagine being raised to believe in a very anthropomorphic God. A God who sits on a literal throne, gets angry, grants favors, and micromanages the universe like a king.
Standard medieval Catholic teaching.
Right. Neoplatonism, which stems from the ancient philosopher Plotinus, argues for something vastly different. It posits that there is a single, incomprehensible, infinite source called the One.
The One. Not a guy with a beard.
No, completely beyond human traits. And everything in the universe, including your human soul, is an emanation or like a ripple outward from the One.
Like a drop of water from the ocean.
Exactly. And the further you get from the One, the more flawed and material things become. So the material world isn't a beautiful creation to be celebrated. It's a flawed, distant shadow.
A prison, almost.
Yes. The ultimate goal of existence isn't to please a king on a throne. It is to intellectually and spiritually purify yourself to return to the One.
It's basically a philosophical realization that the physical world is an illusion and your soul is a trapped piece of the divine.
Which is pure Gnosticism.
You can see how perfectly that meshes with it.
Yeah.
It's like smuggling a banned textbook on quantum physics into a strict fundamentalist boarding school.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
And suddenly the students realize the rigid curriculum they've been taught is just a tiny, simplified fraction of a much larger, wilder reality. The world is way bigger than the Pope said it was.
The Nizari Ismailis had fully embraced this larger reality, but they were also highly militant. As minority Shiite Muslims, they were fiercely opposed to the dominant Sunni Muslim establishment surrounding them.
So they were surrounded by enemies on all sides.
Completely. So they were religious revolutionaries who utilized a hierarchical, mystical, secret society model to wage an asymmetric war against the established political and religious world order of their time.
And they utilized targeted assassinations, hence the name.
Hence the name. They were so pragmatic in their survival strategies that at one point they were even prepared to form an alliance with the Christian Crusaders against the Sunni leader Saladin.
Wow, the ultimate expression of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if we pray to entirely different concepts of God.
Exactly. Pragmatism over dogma.
Wasserman draws some massive structural parallels between the Assassins and the Templars in his work, doesn't he? They weren't just neighbors, they were kind of mirrors of each other.
The structural and ideological similarities are incredibly striking once you look past the different religions. Both were highly disciplined, hierarchically structured secret societies.
Both wore distinctive uniforms, too.
Yes, white robes for the Templars, white tunics for the Assassins. Both demanded absolute obedience from their lower ranks. Both believed in hidden wisdom reserved for the initiated elite and special unbreakable bonds of loyalty.
It's the same blueprint.
It really is. Most importantly, both existed to engage in armed, physical struggle in the name of the highest possible religious aspirations.
Warrior monks.
Exactly. Wasserman makes a compelling case that the Templars didn't just fight the Assassins on the battlefield, they interacted with them constantly.
They had to. They lived in the same space.
Right. They negotiated border disputes with them, they paid and collected tolls from them, and ultimately, through decades of proximity, they absorbed their sophisticated Gnostic philosophies.
It makes total sense logically. The Templars spent decades, generations even, living out in the Holy Land. It is impossible to think they wouldn't absorb the culture, the architecture, and the ideas of the people they were living next to.
You can't live somewhere for 100 years and not be changed by it.
No. It is like going abroad for an immersive college program and coming back completely changed. Except they came back as a highly trained, massively wealthy military force with a secret mystical doctrine.
And that is exactly Wasserman's central thesis. He argues that this prolonged contact with Ismaili philosophy in the Levant was the primary conduit for reintroducing these ancient Gnostic teachings back into European esotericism.
The Templars essentially became the carrier wave for these ideas.
They brought the virus back home, so to speak.
But bringing Eastern Gnosticism back into 13th century Catholic Europe was incredibly dangerous.
Lethally dangerous.
Which brings us to a group called the Cathars. Because if the Templars brought the intellectual spark back from the Middle East, the Cathars were a forest of dry brush just waiting to catch fire.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Who were the Cathars and where were they located?
The Cathars were arguably the most widespread, deeply entrenched, and popular Gnostic movement in medieval Europe. They flourished predominantly in the Languedoc region.
Which is in the south of modern-day France, right?
Correct. The Languedoc at the time was wealthy, highly cultured, relatively tolerant, and culturally very distinct from northern France.
Almost like a different country.
Exactly. They even spoke a different language, Occitan. Now, the Cathars completely rejected the material world. More dangerously, they vehemently rejected the Catholic Church's wealth, its political authority, and its sacraments.
So they were doing the exact thing the Pope feared.
Yes, they practiced a very austere, pure form of Gnosticism. They believed the physical world was created by an evil demiurge, not the true God. And the Catholic Church, specifically under Pope Innocent III, decided this was an infection that had to be eradicated at all costs.
We weren't going to just debate them.
No. In 1289, the Pope called for the Albigensian Crusade.
Wait, a crusade not in the Middle East, but right in the heart of Europe? Against other Europeans? I think a lot of people don't realize the crusades happened internally, too.
It's a hugely overlooked part of history. It was named the Albigensian Crusade after the city of Albi, which was a major Cathar stronghold, and it was a brutal, multi-decade, genocidal campaign.
Just absolute slaughter.
Horrific. And it wasn't just about theology, it was largely driven by northern French lords who were incredibly eager for a holy excuse to march south and seize the wealthy lands and estates of the southern nobles.
Follow the money. It's always a land grab.
Always. It culminated in unimaginable horrors, most famously the Siege of Montségur in 1244.
What happened there?
Hundreds of Cathars who had taken refuge in this mountain fortress refused to renounce their faith when they surrendered. So the Crusaders burned them alive in a massive communal pyre at the base of the mountain.
Oh my God. Just horrific.
It was meant to send a message.
So place the Templars into this landscape for me. What does this mean for them? Because the Languedoc wasn't just Cathar territory. It was essentially the Templar heartland in Europe, wasn't it?
It was. They had massive estates, commanderies, incredible wealth, and really deep local roots there.
So they are caught squarely in the middle of war between their boss, the Pope, and their neighbors.
Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place.
Right. Do they support the Pope and help slaughter the locals who they've lived next to for generations? Or do they support their neighbors who happen to share the very Gnostic philosophies they've been secretly studying in the East?
It is the ultimate crisis of both conscience and politics. James Wasserman, in his analysis, actually condemns the Templars for participating in this crusade at all.
He thinks they shouldn't have been there.
Right. But when you look closely at the historical evidence, their participation was incredibly half-hearted, almost to the point of insubordination.
How so?
Well, despite having a massive, highly trained military presence scattered throughout the Languedoc, the Templar Knights outright refused to fight alongside the northern French Crusaders. They simply wouldn't take the field against the Cathars the way they aggressively fought against Muslim armies in the Levant.
Okay, so that's passive resistance. They're just staying in their castles and saying, we're sitting this one out.
Exactly.
But the Wilson text says they went much further than just sitting on their hands. Michel Lamy brings up specific, highly documented cases of the Templars actively, covertly defying the Pope and the Inquisition.
Yes, the historical record points to them actively providing safe haven. Lamy writes about a specific nobleman named Pierre de Fenouillet.
Okay, who was he?
He was a prominent local lord who was dispossessed of all his lands and condemned by the church for being a Cathar heretic.
So he's a wanted man, a fugitive.
A very high-profile fugitive. So where does a condemned fugitive go? He withdraws to the Templar house of Masdu in Roussillon.
I have to pause on the logistics of this. How does a highly visible military order just hide a famous condemned heretic from the Dominican Inquisitors? Wouldn't the Inquisitors just knock on the door and say, hand him over?
You would think so, but it comes down to the unique legal status of the Templars. They were completely autonomous. They answered only to the Pope.
Ah, diplomatic immunity.
Exactly. A Templar preceptory like Masdu was essentially a fortified sovereign embassy. Local lords and even local bishops and inquisitors had absolutely no jurisdiction there.
So they literally couldn't cross the threshold.
They couldn't. The Templars took Pierre de Fenouillet in, they protected him from the crusade, and when he eventually died around 1242, they buried him with honors on their own consecrated ground.
Wow.
Lummy also mentions another Cathar noble, Pons III de Vernay, who was similarly given sanctuary at Mosdou and buried there.
And the Inquisition, which had a very, very long memory, didn't just let that go, did they?
No, they absolutely did not.
The text mentions a detail that is so horrifying and macabre, it almost sounds fictional. Decades later, the Inquisition actually went after these dead men, right?
They did. In 1262, long after Pierre and Pons were dead and buried, the Dominican inquisitors were still so furious about this defiance that they literally marched into the Templar graveyard.
Oh, man.
They dug up the dead, rotting bodies of Pierre and Pons, put their corpses on trial for heresy, condemned them posthumously, and burned their skeletal remains at the stake.
That is a level of bureaucratic, vindictive hatred that is genuinely hard to fathom. They put skeletons on trial.
It speaks volumes about the absolute terror and insecurity the church felt regarding heresy. They needed to make a public example, even of the dead.
But if we try to understand the Templars' mindset here, think about who these knights were.
Right, look at their life experience.
These are men who have traveled the known world, they have lived in the Levant, they have engaged in deep diplomacy with Nizari Ismailis, they have absorbed ancient Eastern mysticism and these complex Neoplatonic philosophies.
They've seen the world.
Yeah. They likely viewed the church's brutal, violent orthodoxy in Europe, burning people alive for their personal spiritual beliefs, as incredibly narrow-minded, primitive, and cruel.
I think that's a very fair assessment.
They saw their peaceful neighbors being slaughtered for simply wanting a direct relationship with God. So they quietly leveraged their legal immunity. They opened their doors, they offered sanctuary.
It was an incredibly moral, humanitarian choice.
It was. But I want to challenge the Templar strategy here, though.
Okay, lay it on me.
If they are learning secret philosophies from Shiite revolutionaries in the Middle East, and then coming back to France to quietly harbor fugitives from the Pope, isn't that incredibly foolish?
From a purely political standpoint.
Yes. The Pope is the only legal authority validating their existence. They had to know this was going to put a massive, unmissable target on their backs. They were the wealthiest organization in Europe, they operated in total secrecy, and they were quietly defying the most powerful institution on Earth. Was it just staggering arrogance?
It is a brilliant question, and historians debate this constantly. Was it institutional arrogance, profound moral conviction, or simply a miscalculation of their own invincibility?
Because they had been untouchable for a long time.
Nearly 2 centuries. But you are absolutely right. Politically, it was a fatal posture. Their independent wealth, their massive network of fortress banks across Europe, and their quiet ideological defiance made them the perfect victims.
They stuck out.
They had become an autonomous state, operating within a state, and they were about to run headlong into a French king who desperately needed money and a pope who was too politically weak to stop him.
Which brings us to the catastrophe, the date that literally gave us the superstition of Friday the 13th.
That's a famous date.
Friday, October 13th, 1307. Set the scene for us. What actually happens on that morning?
It is one of the most stunning logistical feats of the medieval era. King Philip V of France, who, it is crucial to note, was massively, cripplingly in debt to the Templar Bank's plans, a flawless, coordinated dawn raid.
He owed them money, so he just decided to erase the bank.
Basically, sealed orders had been sent to his seneschals across France weeks in advance, with strict instructions to be opened simultaneously. At dawn on October 13th, every single Templar in France is arrested in their beds.
Just a total sweep.
Complete surprise. They are stripped of their mantles, thrown in chains, their assets are immediately frozen and seized by the crown, and the men are handed straight over to the Inquisition.
Just like that, the most powerful elite knights in the world are wiped off the board before breakfast.
It was shocking.
Now, before you get into the grim historical reality of what happened to these men in the dungeons, we really need to address the massive pop culture myth that sprang up around these trials, specifically regarding a document called the Chinon Parchment.
Ah, yes, the Chinon Parchment.
If you read historical thrillers, you've probably heard this name. What is the myth here?
The Chinon Parchment has become a massive trope in esoteric fiction. Our source material calls out authors like Steve Barry, who uses it as a central plot device in his best-selling novel, The Templar Legacy. In the fiction, Characters claim that Chinon Parchment was a secret, hidden papal bull issued by Pope Clement V that completely, unequivocally absolved the Templars of all charges of heresy.
Basically saying, hey, my bad, you guys are actually innocent.
Right. There was also an Italian media publisher named Adriano Forgione who pushed this exact same narrative as historical fact, that the Pope knew they were innocent and secretly issued a full exoneration that the Vatican then intentionally covered up for 700 years.
It is such an appealing story. It's the ultimate hidden truth narrative. The idea that the Pope actually knew they were good guys, secretly pardoned them, but the greedy king and the dusty archives buried the truth.
It sells books, that's for sure.
But according to Dr. Robert J. Kovarek's highly detailed analysis published in the Boson Journal, that Hollywood narrative is entirely provably false.
Dr. Kovarek breaks this down meticulously. The document was indeed lost or misfiled in the Vatican secret archives until a researcher named Dr. Barbara Frail discovered it relatively recently.
So it is a real document.
It is real, but Dr. Kovarek makes it crystal clear. The Chinon Parchment is absolutely not a papal bull of exoneration. It is a cold, bureaucratic, chillingly procedural judicial document.
So what is it actually recording?
It is essentially a legal transcript detailing the severe interrogation of the highest-ranking Templar leaders at the Castle of Chinon in August of 1308.
To truly understand why this document is so horrifying, we have to pause and look at the legal mechanics of the Inquisition. Because if you are listening to this with a modern, Western legal mindset, you're likely thinking of innocent until proven guilty, or a trial by a jury of your peers.
Which is common law.
Right. That is common law. That is absolutely not what the Templars faced.
Not even close. The Inquisition operated strictly on Roman law procedure, specifically the inquisitorial system.
How does that work?
Under this system, the magistrate acts as both the investigator and the judge. And crucially, simply being arrested based on public rumor or accusation meant you were legally presumed guilty.
Wait, so the arrest itself is the proof of guilt?
Yes. The entire purpose of an inquisitorial trial was not to weigh evidence and discover the objective truth. The purpose was to extract a confession from the accused to validate the arrest that had already happened.
And to get that confession, they used whatever tools they deemed necessary.
Yes. Torture was legally permitted, heavily regulated, but routinely applied. It was viewed as a legitimate legal tool to extract the truth from a stubborn, sinful soul.
So the Chinon Parchment isn't a not guilty verdict hidden by the church. It's a transcript of a forced plea bargain made under the immediate threat of torture and execution.
That is exactly what it is.
It's the Inquisition saying, you confess to these specific crimes, you beg the Pope for mercy on your knees, and we let you live out your days in a dark dungeon. You refuse to confess, or you take back your confession, and we burn you alive.
That is the exact brutal calculus. And this raises an incredibly important historiographical question about the nature of truth itself. How do we, as modern people, evaluate historical facts when our primary source documents are extracted through systematic agony?
You can't trust a word of it.
You really can't. Furthermore, under Roman inquisitorial law, if you confessed under torture and then later revoked that confession, you were legally classified as a relapsed heretic.
Meaning you lied to the church twice.
Exactly. And the mandatory punishment for a relapsed heretic was to be handed over to the secular authorities to be burned at the stake. No exceptions.
Let's step away from the abstract Latin legal terms for a moment and place ourselves in the actual room. Let's look at the actual human being sitting in the dark, damp keep of the Tour de Coudray at Chinon in 1308. Who exactly are we talking about here?
We are talking about the absolute highest echelon of the Templar Order. The men whose signatures controlled fleets and treasuries.
The executives.
The C-suite, basically. The Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay, is there. Along with him are the most senior regional commanders, Raimbault de Quiron, Geoffrey de Charnay, Hugo de Perrot, and Geoffrey de Gonville.
These aren't young men either, right?
No, and that's what makes reading the Chinon Parchment so heartbreaking. You have to know the background of these specific men. With the exception of Gonville, who joined later, these men had all joined the Templars as teenagers.
Wow. So their whole lives.
They had dedicated over 40 years of their lives to the order. They fought in the brutal heat of the Middle East. They bled. They led armies. They managed complex international diplomacy.
They were seasoned veterans.
And now in their 60s, which, by the way, was considered ancient in the early 14th century, they are broken, starved, psychologically shattered, and subjected to the physical horrors of King Philip's inquisitors for nearly a year.
The political chess match happening above their heads is just as wild.
Yeah.
King Philip V had already paraded 72 what he called carefully conditioned Templars before Pope Clement V earlier in May of 1308.
And carefully conditioned is a terrifying euphemism.
Right, it just means heavily tortured men who parroted whatever the king told them to say. But the Pope, to his minor credit, wasn't satisfied with the lower ranks. He demanded to hear from the executive leadership himself.
He wanted Molay.
So he sends 3 high-ranking cardinals to the castle at Chinon in August. And the apostolic notaries are sitting there, quills in hand, recording every single agonizing word. Let's look at the specific charges. What exactly did these proud, elderly warriors confess to?
The interrogations focus heavily on 3 main areas designed to shock the public: blasphemy, illicit acts regarding chastity, and idol worship.
Okay, let's look at the blasphemy charge first.
Right. 4 of these top leaders admitted to denouncing Christ on the cross during their secret, closed-door initiation ceremonies. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself, admitted to being ordered to spit on the cross.
Which is the ultimate heresy for a Christian knight.
Exactly. But the notary records a desperate, pathetic clarification from him. Molay insisted he didn't spit directly on the cross, but merely spat near it.
He's haggling over inches.
He is. And then he offered this agonizing excuse, recorded verbatim in the parchment. He said, "My denunciation did not come from the heart, but from the mouth."
Oh, man. That line, not from the heart, but from the mouth.
Yeah.
It completely guts me. It is the literal sound of a man trying desperately to save his eternal soul while his physical body is just giving up.
It's survival instinct mixed with terror.
He's saying, I said the words you forced me to say, but I didn't mean them. It's just awful. What about the other charges, the ones about chastity?
Regarding chastity and intimacy, they admitted that kisses were exchanged on the mouth, the navel, and the base of the spine during the reception of new knights.
Which, kissing on the mouth wasn't entirely unusual for medieval oaths of fealty between men, was it?
No, it was a standard feudal greeting. But the inquisitors explicitly twisted it to imply homosexuality. Hugo de Perraud confessed to requiring these illicit kisses and gave a very pragmatic, if scandalous, directive.
What did he say?
He confessed to telling knights who were completely unable to restrict their physical lust to join themselves with brothers of the order, rather than breaking their vows of chastity publicly with women, which would cause a massive public scandal.
Basically keeping it in-house to avoid PR nightmares.
Right. However, it is crucial to note that despite the immense pressure and torture, none of the leaders admitted to the actual physical act of sodomy.
And what about the famous idol? The worshipped head that features in literally every Templar conspiracy theory, the Baphomet.
That is perhaps the most revealing part of the Chinon transcript. Out of all the top leaders interrogated by the cardinals, only Hugo de Perraud admitted to knowing anything whatsoever about a worshipped head.
Only one of them.
Yes. The rest, including the Grand Master, completely denied it. The inconsistency points strongly to the fact that they were just saying whatever they thought would make the torture stop.
So they confess.
Yeah.
They say the words the cardinals need to hear to close the file. They swear on the Holy Gospel that their confessions are freely given, which is a sick, dark joke considering they've been chained to walls in a dungeon for nearly a year.
It's an absolute farce.
What happens next? Does the Pope save them? Do they get to go home?
This is the ultimate tragedy of the Chinon Parchment and what Dr. Kovarik really highlights. The absolution they received was purely procedural.
So it meant nothing.
Basically, the leaders fell to their knees, wept, begged the church for mercy, and the cardinals formally granted them absolution, reinstating them to the spiritual communion of the Catholic Church.
Okay.
But it was entirely hollow. Pope Clement V ultimately chose his own political survival over justice. To appease King Philip V, who was threatening a literal schism in the church and dangling the promise of leading a brand new, massive crusade.
Which was always an illusion. He never went on crusade.
Never. But to appease him, the Pope officially, permanently abolished the entire Templar order at the Council of Vienne in 1312.
And the leaders who confessed, they're absolved of heresy, so they're free, right? I mean, their order is gone, but they live.
They were absolved spiritually, but abandoned physically and politically. The Pope simply handed them back to the king's justice. They were left to rot in prison for years.
Unbelievable betrayal.
And finally, in 1314, realizing fully that they had been betrayed by the Pope, that their life's work was destroyed, and that the order was dead, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny did something incredibly brave.
What did they do?
They were brought out onto a scaffold in Paris to publicly repeat their confessions one last time. It was supposed to be a big PR event for the king. Instead, they stood up, defied the king and the cardinals to their faces, and publicly revoked their forced confession.
Whoa.
They declared in front of the crowds that the Templar order was entirely innocent of all charges.
Knowing exactly what the legal consequence of that revocation meant under Roman law.
Exactly. The moment they said those words, they legally became relapsed heretics. King Philip V didn't even wait for the church to officially act. That very evening, he had them taken to a small island in the Seine River in Paris and burned alive at the stake.
God.
That fire marked the tragic, definitive end of the original medieval Knights Templar.
It's a devastating end. These men dedicated over 4 decades of their lives, their entire youth, their adulthood, their bodies, to this singular cause, only to be forced to systematically dismantle their own legacy just to survive a few more miserable years in a cell, and then they were burned anyway.
It's one of the darkest chapters of the Middle Ages.
But this raises a profound question about institutions and memory. What happens when an organization with that much accumulated wealth, that much profound history, and that much deeply ingrained mystique is violently, suddenly wiped off the map?
It's a huge vacuum.
Does it just vanish into the dry history books alongside the Cathars?
History shows us time and time again that while an Inquisition can burn men and a king can seize stone castles, it is incredibly, perhaps impossibly difficult to kill a memory.
You can't burn an idea.
You really can't. The sheer shocking injustice of the 1307 arrests, the dramatic flair of the curse that Jacques de Molay supposedly shouted at the king and pope from the flames, all of it ensured the Templars would never just fade away.
They became legends instantly.
Yes. They left a massive psychological vacuum in European history. They became a blank canvas for centuries of myth-making, esoteric societies, and romantic revivalists. And eventually, that enduring myth led to a literal resurrection.
Which brings us beautifully to the second half of our source material, the Beauséant Journal and the modern era. We are looking at what the Knights Templar look like right now, 700 years after Jacques de Molay burned on that island.
And the contrast is absolutely staggering.
It really is. The journal introduces us to the Grand Priory of the United States of America, the GPUSA, which is part of the larger sovereign military order of the Temple of Jerusalem, or SMOTJ. What are they doing today? Are they standing outside churches, guarding roads with broadswords?
Not quite. The evolution of the organization is fascinating. They have transformed entirely from a medieval, heavily armed military force, violently defending physical territories in the Levant, into a modern, legally recognized global humanitarian organization.
So they traded the swords for checkbooks.
Literally. The swords they carry now are purely ceremonial. The real weapons they deploy today are logistical supply chains, 501c tax statuses, and modern corporate branding.
The journal outlines their current missions, and it is a massive, fundamental shift in purpose. They raise funds for something they call the Jerusalem Mite. Walk me through the mechanics of that. What exactly is a mite?
Historically, a mite was a very small copper coin, symbolizing a humble but meaningful charitable donation. The modern Jerusalem Mite is a dedicated charitable fund managed by the order, designed specifically to keep the road to Jerusalem open and safe for all worshipers.
Wow. It is a beautiful, peaceful, almost poetic echo of their original, violent medieval mandate.
It really is.
Instead of fighting bloody wars to militarily control the Holy Land, they are funding diplomatic and infrastructural efforts to ensure peaceful, unhindered access to it for pilgrims.
Right. They also heavily support programs designated as Christians at Risk in the Middle East, providing direct financial, medical, and logistical aid to minority Christian communities living in incredibly volatile, dangerous areas of the globe.
And what I found fascinating is that the leadership is incredibly proactive. The journal mentions the Grand Prior at the time, a retired military man named Major General Robert Disney, who is championing a new initiative that has absolutely nothing to do with the Middle East or ancient crusades.
No, it's very modern.
He is pushing the entire order to pivot and fight the #1 killer of children globally, dysentery. They are moving into global health initiatives.
Which demonstrates incredible institutional adaptability. They recognize where the modern battles for human life are actually being fought, but they don't just operate on a massive global scale, they also act very locally.
Yeah, the journal highlights a fascinating, very specific program run by the Priory of St. King Charles the Martyr, located in Washington, D.C. It's called the Silent Night Program.
I love the logistics of this detail.
Tell me how the Silent Nights actually operate.
The members of this specific priory privately and completely anonymously, donate tens of thousands of dollars to local community causes, shelters, and food banks. And here is the mechanical kicker that makes it so unique. They purposefully do it without seeking any tax deductions or public recognition.
In a modern corporate culture, completely obsessed with PR and tax write-offs, it is pure, anonymous charity.
Yes, it is a direct, modern translation of the original Templar vow of extreme poverty and selfless service, just executed through modern financial action rather than giving up personal property to live in a stone barracks.
I really want to dig into how they actually govern and operate themselves today, because reading the Beauseant Journal is just wild. It is full of internal memos that show an organization that is deeply obsessed with modern transparency, corporate governance, and global unity.
They run it like a very tight nonprofit.
There is an entire article in the 2007 edition about a major branding change. At their Grand Convent held in Williamsburg, they took a formal vote to fundamentally change their logo.
Oh, the cross change.
Yeah. They told all members to stop using the patriarchal cross, the cross with the two horizontal bars, and replace it with the traditional flared cross pate on their white mantles. Why the sudden uniform change?
It is entirely a matter of international trademarking and global corporate alignment.
Seriously.
Trademarks.
Seriously. The GPUSA wanted to align seamlessly with the broader international governing body, the OSMTH in Geneva. As the internal journal explicitly states to its members, we live in a world full of pretender organizations, internet scams, and fake chivalric orders trying to make a quick buck off the Templar name.
Oh, that makes sense. People selling fake knighthoods online.
Exactly. To protect their charitable work, they needed a legally protected, internationally recognized trademark. They need people to know exactly who they are dealing with and guarantee where their charitable donations are actually going.
It is the perfect intersection of medieval iconography meeting modern intellectual property law.
It is. It is so practical, it's almost funny to read. They literally put a notice in the journal telling members they can buy the new approved patch from the Grand Armorer for $25 plus shipping and handling, and they instruct them to just sew it directly over the old cross on their robes.
Very pragmatic.
It's such pragmatic middle management logistics applied to a 900-year-old knightly order.
And speaking of modern logistics, we have to talk about how they gather for their meetings.
Oh, the convention.
The medieval Templars held their tense, secretive chapters in cold stone fortresses in Antioch or heavily guarded keeps in Paris. Where did the modern GPUSA hold their 2008 Grand Convent?
On board a massive Royal Caribbean cruise ship, the Enchantment of the Sea.
I genuinely cannot get over this image. Put yourself on that ship.
I know, it's amazing.
You are on a Caribbean vacation, holding a piña colada, and you walk past a conference room full of modern knights and dames wearing flowing white mantles and bright red crosses, holding incredibly formal, solemn change of command ceremonies while sailing past the Bahamas.
It's quite a visual. The journal literally breaks down the pricing for the members. $585 for a standard inside cabin, $925 if you want a balcony suite. It is such an incredible, surreal blend of ancient, solemn titles and modern leisure class logistics.
It is surreal, but if we connect this to the broader theme of our deep dive, it is actually the central key to their survival.
How so?
The medieval Templars were ultimately destroyed because their vast, unregulated wealth, their autonomous military power, and their absolute, uncompromising secrecy made them a terrifying threat to the established state.
Right.
The modern Templars survive and actively thrive precisely because they completely inverted that structural model.
Break down that inversion for us.
They took their incredible historical mystique, the dramatic white robes, the ancient titles, the red crosses, and instead of hiding it behind castle walls, they turned it outward. They weaponized their own myth to create a highly visible engine for global charity and community service.
So they're using the brand for good.
Exactly. They swapped deadly medieval secrecy for modern corporate transparency. They swapped being a political threat to kings for strict trademark protections and IRS 501c3 compliance.
That's brilliant.
They realized the ultimate lesson of 1307, you cannot be burned at the stake by the authorities if you operate entirely in the open, file public tax returns, publish newsletters, and host your annual galas on cruise ships.
There is a profound, almost beautiful historical irony here. King Philip IV and his Dominican inquisitors literally broke Job de Maillet's body to erase the Templars from history. They burned him to turn the order to ash and scatter it to the wind.
They tried to annihilate them.
But 700 years later, you have modern men and women investing brand new knights in Bruton Parish Church in Virginia, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight childhood dysentery, and organizing Caribbean cruises under the banner of the Red Cross. In a very real, tangible way, the Templars outlasted and won out over the King of France.
It is the ultimate historical vindication. Think about it. The absolute institution of the French monarchy that destroyed them is entirely gone, swept away by revolutions.
Gone completely.
The medieval Inquisition is universally remembered as a dark, shameful chapter in history books. But the Order of the Temple, reinvented, restructured, and repurposed, is still holding investitures today. Furthermore, they have evolved morally in ways their founders couldn't comprehend.
Oh, definitely.
The journal mentions a specific subgroup, the titular priory of New Amsterdam.
Right, the honorary group within the order. How do they function?
They function as a bridge. It is a priory where members of the Order of Merit work together. And what is crucial to understand here is that membership in this specific group can be explicitly bestowed on non-Christians.
Oh, wow. That's a huge shift.
Massive. They are actively bringing people of diverse cultural and religious backgrounds together to work collaboratively for human rights and to ensure that the road to Jerusalem is open to everyone, regardless of their personal faith.
It is a complete 180-degree moral turn from the exclusionary, violent, zero-sum crusades that birthed them in the 12th century.
So we have tracked an evolution from knights fighting bloody sectarian wars to exclusively control religious sites to modern knights raising money to ensure every single person on Earth can visit those sites in peace.
It's a remarkable trajectory. The journey we've explored today, from the bloody, sun-baked sands of Outremer to the quiet Gnostic sympathizers hiding in the Languedoc, down into the terrifying torture chambers of Chinon, and finally emerging into the brightly lit charity galas of Washington, D.C., is a profound testament to the endurance of an idea.
It really is.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. We have gone down into the dark, terrifying, bureaucratic dungeons of the medieval Inquisition, and thankfully, we have emerged into the philanthropic cruise ship sailing light of the modern order.
It has been a truly fascinating exercise in unpacking myth versus documented reality and understanding the logistics of history.
But before we let you go, we want to leave you with a lingering, provocative question to mull over on your own.
Something to think about.
Exactly. For centuries, historians, novelists, and conspiracy theorists have obsessed over whether the Templars possessed a literal, physical treasure, a wooden Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or some magical, esoteric scroll hidden deep beneath the Temple Mount.
The stuff of movies.
But looking at the entire 900-year arc we've discussed today, what if the true, ultimate, secret doctrine of the Templars was never a physical object at all?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
What if their secret was simply their staggering, unparalleled adaptability? Think about it. The intellectual flexibility to absorb new, radical ideas from enemy cultures like the assassins in the 12th century. The moral flexibility to quietly resist an oppressive, violent church in the 13th century.
And the structural flexibility to survive today.
Exactly. To entirely reinvent themselves from a destroyed military force into a transparent global force for charity in the 21st century. What could a modern organization, or even you as an individual, achieve today if you truly understood that an idea, unlike a fortress of stone or a human body, can never be burned? Next time you hold a piece of history or a glossy brochure, ask yourself, what is the idea that survived? Until next time, keep diving deep.
That wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for watching A Moment in Time podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.